These are important things to keep in mind, that when you get the workbook, when you start working with it, do not be too eager, do not be too fast. Take the time to consider these insights we are giving you. Consider what they mean, not just understand them intellectually, but really seek out that shifting experience where you from within experience the truth of what we are saying. My beloved, you have a very, very old tradition on this planet of having gurus, of having mystery schools, where supposedly there is some guru or some institution, and as a student you can go there, you apply yourself as a student, and then the school or the guru is going to take you through a process of initiation whereby you gradually raise your consciousness. But my beloved, it is entirely possible to go to even a genuine guru and a genuine mystery school, and you think you are making progress because you're increasing your outer understanding. But you're not shifting the consciousness, because shifting your consciousness happens only from within. It doesn't happen because somebody tells you something. It doesn't matter if you have a genuine guru who tells you something about your state of consciousness or exposes an aspect of your ego. If you do not receive from within the confirmation, if you do not experience the reality of it within yourself, it will not shift your consciousness. It's the same with all of the teachings we are given through this or other messengers. You can study them, you can understand them with the outer mind, you will be able to quote them, but will it shift your consciousness? Not unless you experience it from within. Not unless you are willing to, as we have told you, let the conscious you step outside of your four lower bodies. Reach for your I Am Presence, reach for your ascended teachers, and experience directly that there is a higher reality than your outer mind. Only then do you shift. And so, what I told you last night was to consider that there is something that you have become comfortable with that is preventing you from seeing the next stage of your divine plan. And naturally, this can be all individual. Some of you have received these insights. Some of you have received nothing and wonder why. But I will give you a general teaching that applies to all of you. It is not meant to override your individual insights, but I'm pointing out that there is a certain thing, a certain psychology that applies to all people on earth, and therefore to all spiritual people as well. Now, my beloved, what is the one thing that you're all comfortable with? Well, you have all found some level of comfortability with the idea that if you do certain things and don't do other things, then you cannot be wrong. Then you are okay. You are acceptable. There is a fear that has been programmed into all people on earth because it is a high-density planet, that you can be wrong. Where does this come from? Where does this fear come from? Well, it naturally comes from the fallen beings who, from the moment they started embodying on this planet, have created, as we have told you about before, this entire mindset that is the essence of duality, that there's something that's right and something that's wrong. There is only, as I talked about yesterday, one truth, therefore all the others must be wrong. So this applies to so many areas of life. And so we have said before that the only thing that the fallen beings really had to do to pervert things on earth was to project out the concept that there's a distinction between right and wrong. Some things are right, some things are wrong. Once you have that dualistic relative judgment going on in people's minds, then it automatically follows that people start developing the fear of being wrong. Now, we have given you the teaching that many of you, and here I'm not talking about you here, but in general, many spiritual people have come to earth as avatars. You have come here to make a positive difference. You have experienced the fallen beings who have been very, very aggressive in putting you down. And what is the message they gave you? It is, you were wrong for coming to earth. You are wrong being who you are as an avatar here on earth. You are wrong expressing your real being, your real creativity here on earth. And this gave you what we have called the birth trauma. And in order to deal with that, in order to survive that psychologically, you created what we have said, the internal selves, the primal self. And part of the primal self of all of you is that you have decided that you do not want to constantly experience this sense of being wrong. And so you have found individually your own ways of creating the sense that if I stay within certain boundaries, then I'm not wrong. And this is something that, of course, goes all the way back to when you received your birth trauma, but you can also look in this lifetime, and you can look how you were brought up by the society to have certain boundaries. You stay within certain boundaries, then you are acceptable to your native society. Then you are following the norm, and society won't condemn you, and other people around you in your family and environment won't condemn you if you stay within these boundaries. And so what I'm pointing out to you is that you all have these subtle beliefs, structures, matrices in your four lower bodies that say that if I stay within these boundaries, I cannot be wrong. And then you also have this sense that as long as you stay within these boundaries, you are comfortable. You are comfortable in not being wrong, according to the norms of your society, but ultimately according to the standard of the fallen beings. Because, my beloved, any society that enforces, programs into its citizens the idea that there are some things that are wrong and some things that are right, any society is influenced by the fallen beings. Now, naturally, some will take this with a linear mind and say, does that mean I'm saying nothing is right and nothing is wrong and people can do whatever they want? Well, of course not. As we have said before, any society must define certain boundaries. Obviously, it is not right to go out and kill other people. But what I'm talking about here is not so much the outer behavior, but more an inner behavior of your beliefs, your attitudes, what you talk about. In other words, the real issue here that I want to bring to your attention is that what is programmed into these standards that all societies have is that there are certain ideas that are acceptable and certain ideas that are wrong. And if you believe in these ideas, you are wrong. But if you talk about these ideas, you are even more wrong. And if you change your life and act upon these ideas, you are really wrong. And so, naturally, we're not looking at here having spiritual people go out and do all kinds of things that are illegal or wrong according to a normal standard of common sense. But what we are looking at here is to have you consider that there are certain ideas that it would be uncomfortable for you to question. If you're willing to look at this individually, you can gradually come to see that whether it was just from this lifetime or whether it goes back many lifetimes, there are certain ideas that if you were to question these, you would feel uncomfortable. And one way to expose this is to read the book about the My Lives, where you will see that many people feel there were certain ideas in that book that made them feel uncomfortable because they had to question their existing beliefs. But there are, of course, many other examples of this. Often our teachings do the same thing to people. But the point here is, if you can identify that there is a certain idea that you do not want to question, you take for granted, you believe this is some higher truth, then I can assure you that this is part of your comfortability. And it comes from the fact that if you accept this idea, if you don't question it, then you feel you can't be wrong, and that makes you feel comfortable. So if you were to question this idea, you become uncomfortable because now you are afraid that you could be wrong, and you could be condemned. And whatever that fear is for you individually based on your experiences in past lives of often being persecuted harshly by other people, then you are afraid to open up this can of worms, as they say, so because you never know what's going to happen. And so what I wish to point out to you here is that many of you who have walked the spiritual path for a long time and who have reached a certain level of consciousness, you have reached the point, as it says in the New Invocation, where you are beginning to, your challenge is to more consciously express the Christhood that you built into your divine plan. And what is Christhood? Well, it can be defined in many ways, but as Jesus has said several times, including recently, that Christhood is challenging status quo. The Christ comes into embodiment, the living Christ in embodiment has as its primary purpose to challenge status quo and make people realize that there is an alternative to the state of consciousness that has become a closed system. And so I can assure you that all of you who are open to these teachings and who have reached a more mature level of the path, there is a certain element of Christhood that is built into your divine plans. You are here to challenge status quo in some way. This may not be in some ultimate way where you bring forth some new revolutionary ideology that challenges existing ideologies. For many of you, it is at the personal level where you challenge the way the people around you look at certain problems or look at certain aspects of life. And so it can be very individual how you're meant to do this, but all of you have this as an element of your divine plan. And what I am bringing you to is the awareness here that in order to actually be able to see this and in order to be able to implement it, you need to be willing to look at your fear of being wrong. And you need to recognize that this is an integral part of your birth trauma. It is an integral part of your primal self. And so that is where, as I have said before, that we have given you a lot of tools before we gave you this teaching on your divine plan, because now you can take the book about healing your spiritual traumas and you can use that to seek to heal this fear of being wrong. Naturally, my beloved, you have come to a point where you recognize both the existence of ascended masters and of fallen beings. And you recognize that we of the ascended masters want to pull you up and set you free from all limitations. And the fallen beings want to pull you down and keep you trapped in those limitations. So you can begin to ask yourself, what do you want to live the rest of your life based on the fear of being wrong according to the standard of fallen beings? or the awareness that comes from understanding Ascended Master teachings is that you are never wrong for challenging the ideas of the fallen beings. The world might say you are wrong, but we as the Ascended Masters certainly do not. And so it is very important for you to consider this. This doesn't have to be something you do all at once in an ultimate way, because as I said, you are currently at a certain level of consciousness and your primary concern is to go to the next level up, which is often not such a big dramatic step. And so the question is, what is the fear of being wrong that you are dealing with right now? What is the one idea you could express at your current level of consciousness that would take you to a higher level? And how is the fear of being wrong preventing you from expressing that idea? Now, my beloved, I said earlier that the divine plan is an interactive process. So, if you have it as part of your divine plan, as another example, your family has a certain view of life, a certain attitude to life. There's a particular family member who has the potential to rise higher in this lifetime, but is stuck in this view of life. It is part of your divine plan that you would help that person question this belief and go beyond it. But you're kind of afraid of doing this because you feel that other members of your family would condemn you for doing so. Now, the question now is, how will you rise to the next level of your divine plan? Can you rise to the next level of your divine plan without expressing the higher understanding that you seek, without actually giving that to the other person? And my beloved, you cannot. You cannot rise to the next level without challenging yourself. And why is that? Because, my beloved, you may say, well, if I express my insights, then certain members of my family will get mad at me and I'll get a negative reaction. And I will tell you in a very, very direct manner that it is only by expressing your understanding and experiencing that reaction that you will be forced to shift your own perception, your own attitude, and in dealing with this challenge, experiencing this challenge, will you be able to shift to the next level up. You see, my beloved, it is not a matter of receiving some intellectual understanding. It is not a matter of you having an insight that is higher than your family members. And then you say, because I have this insight, I've already shifted to a higher level of consciousness than they have. And maybe you haven't shifted to a higher level of consciousness than theirs, but you haven't shifted to the next level up, and you won't until you express your insight, experience their reaction, and then deal with your internal reaction to them. Only when you deal with this and find a way to overcome the patterns, the fears, the attachments, the emotional, mental reaction you have, only then will you shift your own consciousness to the next level. And that is why, my beloved, what I'm telling you here is this: you need to come to a point in order to step up and really get into consciously seeing more aspects of your divine plan. You need to get yourself into a frame of mind where you're not afraid to take the experience. Even if it makes you uncomfortable, even if it makes you afraid, you are still willing to take that experience because you realize that it is only in having the experience that you are processing the hang-ups in your own psychology, coming to see them, and then transcending them. We have given you so many tools, my beloved, to transcend the hang-ups in your psychology that you have enough tools to transcend them. But what many of you haven't realized is that you can't sit in your private room and read books and give invocations indefinitely and then experience maximum growth from this. You can experience growth from it, but you need to have the interchange between doing the spiritual work and